Welcome to the Unlist, the most unprofessional fragrance channel on YouTube. So, today's video is actually a request from a subscriber. I know, I actually have subscribers. Who would have thought people actually follow my channel? But the subscriber's name is Lionhearted99, and I made mention that I could do Floral Fougères, a video about Floral Fougères in my men's floral fragrances video, and then he said yes, that he would like that. So I'm like, okay, you want it, you got it. So don't say I never gave you nothing. Floral Fougères, a fairly rare adjunct of the Fougère genre, because Fougères already have some floral notes in them. Obviously, lavender is a flower, geranium is a flower. Many of them have rose in them as well. So to say that Fougères don't have floral notes is just wrong. It is objectively wrong. But to be a floral fougère means that it is a fougère fragrance, obviously, with your bog standard materials, your bergamot, top note, or lemon, the lavender geranium core base of tonka, and or clary sage, and or oak moss, usually the tonka and oak moss, sometimes clary sage and oak moss, sometimes tonka and clary sage without oak moss, and something else like a vernal slid in there to replace it, whatever. To be a floral fougère, you take that basic structure and you add additional floral notes to it, because now the objective is to make a more obviously floral fragrance while still what? You can answer this. Still having a fougère structure, still being a fern accord, basically. We didn't see too many of those during the dawn of the genre, because most fougères in the beginning were just focusing on being themselves, establishing that fern vibrance, that green, sometimes powdery, but green, sort of verdant feeling, the impression of the fern, which doesn't have a smell, obviously, but that was the point. As the genre evolved into the early 20th century, into the mid 20th century, we saw a lot of vanilla notes enter the equation. The tonka would get heavier, clove would be added, sometimes carnation, sometimes heliotrope, which is also a floral. But the point was they became more vanillic, powdery, and sweet. And a lot of that was a reaction to certain fragrances gaining transatlantic popularity after World War II. So there's actual real-world history behind this. You know, Dana's fragrance Canoe, or Canoa, if you say it the way they originally said it. That fragrance was originally marketed to women, but it became a man's fragrance because the GIs took it home after World War II ended, back to the United States. And that fragrance sort of informed the direction fougères would take. And they stayed powdery, and they stayed relatively vanillic, and sweet shave foam products would become associated with that smell. Powder would become associated with that smell. Wasn't really until the 60s that the green side of the fougère was reasserted through fragrances like Brut, through fragrances like British Sterling, and then eventually things like Sir Irish Mousse, and then over time Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, and then we would see the aromatic fougère take over, and the aromatic fougère would double down on herbs, woods, aromatic elements, right, up through things like Azzaro Pour Homme, so on and so forth. And then the fresh fougères came after that. We got more synthetic, more abstract, semi-oriental fougères, where the fougère accord was reinforced with amber, reinforced with sandalwood, oriental materials, as they would call it, spices, things like Pierre Cardin, up through Bois de Portugal, up through Tiffany for Men, Heritage by Guerlain, so on and so forth. Floral fougères, however, never really had a solid movement, I guess you could say. They were always just sort of, well, there's no real polite way to say this, but floral fougères kind of always had like side bitch status. You know, the main squeeze, the girlfriend, the wife, the husband was whatever the fougère du jour was at that era, at that time. The floral fougère was always like after dark, you know, the side bitch, like I said, the person that whose phone number you don't want anyone else knowing you have. And that's kind of how they were treated. And they were not really successful. They were not really marketed all that well. And the few examples of floral fougères we see emerge over time, most of them kind of become anecdotal fragrances. They become footnotes in the greater history of the fougère genre. And then these days, fougères are just kind of all but dead anyway. Anytime they try to release a traditional aromatic fougère with a novel twist into the mainstream, usually there's a surge of sales in the beginning, and then everyone realizes, oh, this smells like my dad, smells like my granddad, or whatever, and then it falls off. So you get that retro hype in the beginning, and then they usually fall off. So traditional fougères just have a hard way to go in general. Most recently, Tom Ford discontinued Beau de Jour, which everyone thought was a really good fragrance. Everyone thought was going to do well because we hadn't had a fragrance on the market like that in a long time. But come to find out, it sold really well to frag heads, right? People like me. I don't own it, but people like me bought it. But Johnny Q Public didn't like it. So it was discontinued very suddenly and sold off very quickly. Almost like Tom Ford knew. So I guess they had already limited supply of it before the decision was made to kill it off. So when they did kill it off, there wasn't actually much stock to get rid of. They had already kind of bottlenecked it, which is really clever and kind of mean. Usually when designers discontinue a fragrance, there's plenty of stock to go around, so people have time to get theirs. But no, they already knew they were going to get rid of it before anyone else did, so they were deliberately slowing down on it. So that way when they did kill it off, it blew out in a couple days. Incredible, right? The day and age we live in, you blink, you miss it. And that's why everyone has FOMO, and that's why everyone buys 15 backups to everything, and it's why everybody freaks the fuck out because of stuff like that. But anyway, I'm a little off topic here. Let's get back onto the facts of the matter, I guess. There aren't a ton of floral fougères from my collection that I can really talk about, so that's why I've spent almost like 9 minutes of this video just giving you like a build-up, because there aren't going to be so many bottles for me to show you like there would be in other videos where I discuss different genres or adjuncts. So pardon if it's kind of scarce on the bottle side of things. But one thing I can tell you is that floral fougères probably had their biggest moment in the 80s. Their biggest moment was definitely in the 80s. And all the examples that I can show you are mostly discontinued. So yeah, their biggest moment still didn't amount really to anything, sadly. Just the way the cookie crumbles, so to speak. But I think the 80s is the decade where you'll find the most examples. Some 90s, early 90s too, but a lot of 80s stuff. So, okay. I'm going to kick it off with one that I've discussed before, but it's a unicorn. It's very expensive, very rare. When I say rare, I mean a few people have hoarded all the bottles for themselves. So it's like RTX graphics cards. The supply is all bottlenecked up by a handful of people, so it's only rare because it's been made rare by all of the hoarding. But Calvin by Calvin Klein, the original men's fragrance from the brand, released in 1981. Perfumer is unfortunately unknown for this one. At least I don't know it. This is a floral fougère. And the reason why I say this is a floral fougère is it has a very floral heart with chamomile as one of the primary focus notes. So you get chamomile in this, and then you also get white florals like lily of the valley, and then you also get some things like I want to say, what is that? What is that flower? What is that? It's a white floral note. And I don't want to look at my computer. I could look it up. I could boot it up and find out for you guys real quick. Be that guy. But there's a white floral material in this that I am not picking up off the top of my memory. But I can find out for you real fast. So let's go do it. Because I don't like guessing. Not a guessing games kind of guy. So let's get to it. And since I own the fragrance, I can just go to base notes, click on my wardrobe, click on the C category, click on my bottle of Calvin, and then lo and behold, so Neroli and Armoire, which is Artemisia, but the flower aspect of Artemisia. So Neroli, chamomile, and Armoire is in this. And that's where I'm getting that white floral feeling that really makes Calvin pretty unique. But unfortunately, it didn't really stand the test of time because it came out in a time when everybody wanted big, musky, woody, leathery, hair of the dog that bit me, Lloyd. That's what I want to drink. So the dalliance tiptoe through the tulips in the garden by the willow tree, right? They didn't want that in 81. So this unfortunately did well because it was a musky fragrance. It was heavy on oak moss, but the rest of it just wasn't really in line with what people wanted. So, and Calvin Klein was also not a huge brand in the early 80s. Calvin Klein would become more successful with their underwear, their jeans, their t-shirts, once they started using actors and actresses and different people to model their clothing for them. That's when the brand exploded. And by the mid-80s, by 85, 86, Back to the Future was out. Stuff like Obsession was out. And then the brand took off. And instead this was left behind in the dust, sadly. But it's a good fragrance. It is. I just wish it wasn't... I wish it wasn't treated like some kind of, holy grail, because it's not. There's nothing in that fragrance that I can't live without, really. And no, I'm not selling my bottle either. I like it enough to keep it, but I don't like it enough to, go crazy about it. So another one, Floral Fougère, would actually be few years later, this guy would come out, Enrico Coveri. And this is a fragrance that I tell people to pick up if they don't want to spend the massive amount of money that it takes, to get a bottle of this. They don't want to spend bank on this, then they can spend less money and get a bottle of this. Because even at its highest price, it is still cheaper than a bottle of the Calvin Klein. So the Enrico Coveri here, its biggest players it's going to really be mostly about geranium in this fragrance. So this one, even though it's a fougere, it's got lavender and geranium. This one is really more about the geranium. So it's got a very sparkly, sort of slightly minty feeling to it. Then the clary sage makes it a very kind of rustic, aggressive fragrance in the base. But it has geranium, and it also has lily of the valley as well. It too has the hydroxy citronellol white floral note. So geranium, lily of the valley really make this stand out as more of a floral fougere with an aromatic edge. And of course, the oak moss, the musk in the base of this makes it fairly in tune with the 80s, you know, the heavy sort of thing. Now, we're going to zip ahead a little bit to Zino Davidoff from 1986. Now, what's really special about this fragrance is this inspired the aforementioned Beau de Jour. Okay, this inspired that fragrance. But what makes this a lot different from Beau de Jour is where Beau de Jour was a much more classic fougere that focused on the lavender and the geranium, the oak moss, the tonka, the patchouli. This is a much more floral fragrance. So I prefer this to Beau de Jour, hence why I didn't buy a bottle of that. Because this feels like Beau de Jour plus flowers. So if you like Beau de Jour, you're a big fan of Beau de Jour, but you would love it with a twist of rose. Also lily of the valley, also jasmine, also rosewood. If you would like that more floral treatment in the heart of your Beau de Jour, then look no further. And there's also a bit of musk in here as well. There's a bit of civet in this. So it's got a bit of that quote-unquote pissy feeling. That musky Uranus kind of vibe. But not enough to make this dirty. This is not really a dirty fragrance. But it is a dandy fragrance, for sure. And it's a whole hell of a lot cheaper than Beau de Jour. Even before Beau de Jour was discontinued. Even before. Now, another one I'm going to show you. This is, I've got two different takes on this actually. Let's get the, where is my vintage bottle of this? I've got the new one, and I've also got a vintage one, but I am not seeing the vintage one. That is peculiar. Where have I put that vintage bottle of this? It's got to be in here somewhere. Come on, where are you? Right here in front of me. Okay, cool. Okay. Good stuff. So, sorry it took so long. Sometimes I get lost in my own collection. It happens when you have this many fragrances. So, 1985, we would see this. The Troisième Homme de Caron, okay? And here's the vintage bottle with Caron written in a different script on the side. So, this is the same bottle that Infini used, if you're familiar with Infini. I've got a bigger vintage bottle. This is only a 50 ml, and it's like half empty. But this is another very big floral fougere, but it crosses a couple different lines because in addition to being a floral fougere, the Troisième Homme is also something of a semi-oriental fougere because in addition to the florals, it has a rich, musky amber accord. So it is somewhere in between Zino Davidoff and something like an Obsession. If you like Obsession, but you wish it had a fougere somewhere underneath of it, and then you want flowers, you want carnation, you want rose, you want jasmine, you want all of that lovely stuff, then the third man is what you want. Le Troisième Homme, the third man, number 3, all the same fragrance. And if you can't get the vintage one that I showed you, you can get the new one that I showed you. It doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. Just get any way you can get. Okay? Do not sweat the small stuff. You're not trying to do that. Now, another one that I could recommend is from 1988. And that little guy right here is a long forgotten Paco Rabanne fragrance, meant to be the successor of Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, but ended up being a failure on the market. I've mentioned this fragrance before. I think I've given it its own video too, actually. But Tenere, the long lost Paco Rabanne fragrance, launched in '88. This really goofy, cool looking bottle. Was only on the market for a handful of years, and then it got discontinued and replaced with XS, which you guys know is a much more well-known fragrance. This is a fragrance that is full of rose, full of sandalwood, full of all kinds of other gorgeous floral notes. And if we take a look at it, then we're going to see all kinds of stuff. Rose, iris, jasmine, carnation, lily of the valley. Man, this has got all kinds of stuff. Cassia is in this as well. And it does have civet, and it does have a nice sandalwood note. So the rose and the sandalwood alone in this really push the structure towards chypre a little bit, but it's still in the fougere zone, obviously. But it's a very, very, very floral fougere. Very redolent, very rich. Sadly discontinued, sadly kind of on the expensive side. So, do I recommend tracking one down? Not really, not unless you got money. I bought mine years ago when it wasn't that expensive, but now it's really expensive, so I would not break your own back for it. Not worth it, but it is nice. One of those things where it's nice to have if it's convenient to have. That's the key here. It's nice to have if it's convenient to have. If it's inconvenient for you to buy it, then don't worry about it. This guy, I've mentioned this fragrance a number of times too. This is another really big floral fougere. And the beautiful thing about this is I've also made mention that it uses some top notes that would later find their way into Creta Ventus. So if you're familiar with a material called allyl amyl glycolate, okay, it's a material used to create a pineapple accord. So that allyl amyl glycolate was in this fragrance. Now, does it smell like a Ventus? Not really, but the opening sure does. However, once you start to develop into the dry down, you will find that all that pineapple-y goodness quickly becomes replaced with an entirely different fragrance. And once more, lots of floral notes. Sorry I keep going to my computer, but I just do not have these notes memorized. I don't memorize note pyramids, okay guys? I don't. So, violet is in this, cloves is in this, angelica is in this. Angelica is really nice. That pineapple that I mentioned before, ylang ylang is in this. So if you like ylang ylang, it's a muskier white floral note. Ylang ylang is responsible for a lot of indolic feeling you'll pick up in fragrances. Very lovely stuff. And the clary sage in the dry down that this has, the clary sage combined with the slightly smoky clove that turns up in this a little later gives it a very interesting floral, fruity, clean fruity pineapple, floral, clary sage, smoky, mossy dry down. Fantastic. Way ahead of its time. Not appreciated. Kind of a cheap cap though. Not really feeling this plastic cap, but okay. Again, not a big deal. Now we move into this guy from 1998. And this is a triple adjunct fragrance because this is not only a floral fougere, it's a fresh fougere. So it crosses the streams twice. It is a double adjunct fragrance. And this little guy, Leroy Soleil, came out in 1998. And it does not get enough credit. So here's the skinny on this one. All right. Leroy Soleil came out in 1998. Same perfumer as XS by Paco Rabanne. So Gerard Anthony. And by the way, Gerard Anthony is also responsible for Azzaro Pour Homme in 78. He is responsible for Balenciaga Pour Homme from 1990. I know y'all love that fragrance too. He's done a lot of good stuff. He did XS Pour Homme for Paco Rabanne, and then he came back and did this for Salvador Dali. This fragrance is like revisiting XS, so the clean, geranium, minty, uplifting smell of XS Pour Homme, but then put a bunch of florals into it, make it a more floral version of XS. So it's like he got his revenge, basically. Because he also made Tenere, by the way. He composed Tenere, which also didn't do well. But he came back to do this, and he more or less took that XS Pour Homme with the big geranium focus, and he put rose in this, jasmine. He put in some rhubarb, which these days we see rhubarb in a lot of modern fragrances. You didn't see rhubarb all that much back in the 90s. So another really ahead of its time fragrance. Floral, clean, a bit fruity too, because there's a papaya note in this, which honestly is probably another chemical with a long name. There is a long benzyl, methylbenzyl something. I'm sure my friend JJ will know this note. It's one of the benzyl methyl things, and it's used to create guava and papaya and notes like that. Very rounded floral note. I could look it up if I wanted to, but I don't want to burn more time on camera looking up chemicals when you don't really need to know the name of it. It's not necessary. Just know that there's a chemical that creates that rounded, fleshy, fruity smell, and it's in here. So combined with the floral notes, though, makes this a very pretty, very nice floral fougere. I'm very fond of. And I wish it got more love. But alas, it does not. So, yeah, that is not a fougere. So, we will not include that one. But we could talk about a more recent fragrance before I call this video a wrap. Like I said, they don't really make too many modern floral fougères anymore. Not so much. I mean, if you really, really look for them, you could probably find them. But one of the more recent ones that I found, 2010s, is this one, Black Gold by Mancera. When I smelled this, I thought, man, this could have come out in the 80s. People would have loved this in the 80s. It is a very floral fougere fragrance. Very, very floral. In fact, I think this is probably more floral than most of the 80s examples. Most of the things that I showed you, most of my vintage fragrances I showed you, this is more floral than them. So that should give you some kind of warning, if you will. This is the final boss. Mancera Black Gold is the final boss of floral fougères. After you've beaten all the others, okay, we're talking Scott Pilgrim, right? All of the ex-boyfriends. You've killed all the ex-boyfriends. You made your way through all of them. The one with the vegan soy thing from outer space, you got him too. You're at the very end. You're at the final boss, and you're squaring off against the black gold here. So now this one, jasmine, violet, rose. Just again with the Mugit, so much stuff. Hyacinth in this, everything, and then it's got spices too. It's got cinnamon, nutmeg. It's got patchouli. It is just, this is a kitchen sink of floral notes, and it is fresh. It is cool. It is floral. It is clean. There's a tiny trace amount of oud in here because a lot of Mancera fragrances have some kind of oud, even if it's synthetic. So this is like a synthetic oud molecule in here. But man, oh man, oh man, oh man, this is going to test your tolerance for floral Fougères fragrances, because underneath it all, you still get the lavender, you still get the geranium, you still got the oak moss, you still got the tonka, you know, the bergamot, all the prerequisites for Fougère. But this is a Fougère basically in a florist shop. Okay, you went right to the florist with this one, and you're wearing a Fougère and you're picking out flowers. That's it. Good stuff though. And that's it, guys. That is my floral Fougère video. You could probably really dig deep for other examples if you want to. I'm sure I could dig deep for other ones if I really wanted to, but we're already 32 minutes and my videos don't run much past that. So thank you for the suggestion, Lionhearted99. Hopefully you enjoyed what I had to show you. And this has been the Unlist.